Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Maready and I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions for the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse, New York. Our museum is currently closed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and New York State's guidelines for non-essential businesses, so we're closed to the public. We've canceled or postponed until further notice all of our in-person programs and events. Even though the museum is closed, we are still working. Our full-timers are putting together information and education and history for you, and we're releasing things on our Facebook page and on our website. The reason that this video exists is because of this development, so if you enjoy this video, we would be so grateful to you if you would become a member of our museum, make a tax-deductible donation to our annual fund. You can help ensure our future by contributing to us today. I'll put some links in the comment section for this video so that you can do that. Alright, so today I'm going to tell you about DeWitt Clinton. DeWitt Clinton was a native New Yorker and a consummate politician who coordinated the effort to get the original Erie Canal constructed beginning in the year 1817. But he was more than just the political spearhead of the Erie Canal, as we're going to learn today. So let's start at the very beginning. DeWitt Clinton was born March 2nd, 1769 in Little Britain, New York, an area which is now in the town of New Windsor, way downstate in Orange County. He was born to Mary DeWitt and Major General James Clinton. James Clinton was a Revolutionary War officer who had helped lead the 1779 Sullivan Expedition. DeWitt was educated at Princeton University and Columbia University and became a lawyer, being admitted to the bar in 1790. So here's a woodcut image of his birthplace in New Windsor. A few famous relatives of DeWitt Clinton included his brother George Clinton Jr., a member of Congress, his half-brother James G. Clinton, another congressman, and cousin Simeon DeWitt, who was the Surveyor General of the state of New York. Here's an 1804 survey map created by Simeon DeWitt. As you can see, this was a family tree firmly rooted in the fortunes and future of New York State. At the age of 21, DeWitt Clinton entered the rough-and-tumble world of politics, serving as the undersecretary for another famous relative, his uncle George Clinton, from 1790 to 1795. George Clinton was then serving as governor of New York, and he would remain New York's governor for 9 terms. DeWitt Clinton later joined the Democratic-Republican Party and would become a political force to reckon with for the duration of his life. So I'm going to give you a little 19th century political history here because I'm sure that the term Democratic Republicans sounds a little oxymoronic to you. Democratic Republicans were a party formed by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the early 1790s to oppose the policies of the Federalist Party. They were considered the first Republican Party in U.S. history and are also known as Jeffersonian Republicans. They espoused state power over that of the federal government. They were more prominent in the South than in the Northeast, and DeWitt Clinton's uncle George Clinton had a big role in the party long before his nephew did. So this party controlled the U.S. presidency and the Congress from 1801 to 1825, having taken over from the Federalists who believed in more centralized government power. And after this period, they splintered into the Jacksonian movement, which became the Democratic Party in 1828, and the National Republican Party, which was succeeded by the Whig Party. Their opposition, the Federalist Party, was considered elitist and disappeared after 1815. So thanks for bearing with me on this little political interlude. Under the banner of the Democratic Republicans, Clinton became a member of the New York State Assembly in 1798, and then served in the New York State Senate from 1798 to 1802, and then again from 1806 to 1811. He was a delegate to the New York State Constitutional Convention in 1801. He was a member of the Council of Appointments in 1801 to 1802 and 1806 to 1807. So he was elected to the U.S. Senate and served from February 9, 1802 to November 4, 1803, and then resigned. He was unhappy with the living conditions and social scene in Washington, D.C. Who wants to hang out with a bunch of government officials? I must admit that learning this about Clinton made me laugh. I am also a D.C. area native, and I much prefer New York to D.C. Clinton was appointed mayor of New York City and served from 1803 to 1815, save for 2 annual terms, a total of 10 one-year terms, 1803 to 1807, 1808 to 1810, and then 1811 to 1815. Clinton's powers as mayor were not to be overlooked. He was in charge of appointing employees for many city positions and served as the presiding judge for the Court of Common Pleas. He was very active in the city's fire department, supervising performance and also helping to create the first fire insurance company. He was in charge of the police force and helped to put down a few riots. Yellow fever was a recurrent epidemic in several American cities in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and when it hit New York City in 1809, Clinton stayed in the city and worked, unlike many other officials who fled to Greenwich. I think we could use him these days. His other accomplishments as mayor included advocacy for free and widespread public education, reform of criminal laws, sanitation improvements, the establishment of public welfare institutions around the city, including a free hospital for the insane, which would later become Bellevue Hospital, and the promotion of legislation removing voting and other restrictions against Roman Catholics. Clinton's time as the mayor of New York City was also marked by a fervent interest in the arts and humanities. Clinton was a scholar, and with his own drive and the power of his office, he helped to create the New York State Historical Society in 1804, which was New York's first museum. He helped organize the American Academy of the Fine Arts in 1808 and served as regent for the University of the State of New York from 1808 to 1825. He was elected as a member of the American Antiquarian Society in 1814 and served as vice president from 1821 to 1828. He was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1816. I'd like to think he'd be proud of the Erie Canal Museum. In 1811, during Clinton's tenure as New York City mayor, the Lieutenant Governor of New York, John Broome, died. A special election was held and Clinton was elected and ended up holding this office until the end of the term in June of 1813. So in 1812, Clinton was approached for a presidential run against incumbent president and fellow Democratic Republican James Madison. Clinton was nominated by the New York caucus of the party after war was declared. He was attempting to create a coalition of pro-war Democratic Republicans and anti-war Federalists. His running mate was Jared Ingersoll of Pennsylvania, a Federalist lawyer. The Federalists did not field a candidate themselves. So here is Jared Ingersoll of Pennsylvania. The election of 1812 was only the 7th overall presidential election and occurred in the shadow of the War of 1812. This was the first election to be held during a major war involving the United States. Clinton changed his campaigning strategy depending on location, holding an anti-war stance in the Northeast and a pro-war stance in the South and West. This strategy was an interesting one that nearly paid off, as the 1812 election was the closest of the period 1800 to 1824. Clinton ended up attracting a lot of Federalist support, along with the support of Northern Democratic Republicans who were tired of the Southern, and particularly Virginian, domination of their party and of the presidency. So here's the breakdown. Madison won both the Electoral College and the popular vote. He got 128 electoral votes to Clinton's 89 and carried 11 states to Clinton's 7. The split of the popular vote was 50.4% for Madison and 47.6% for Clinton. Pennsylvania in particular was contested, with its 25 electoral votes in contention for a whole month amidst numerous recounts. While he did not ultimately succeed in national politics, DeWitt Clinton was elected New York governor in 1817, after sitting Governor Daniel D. Tompkins left the office to become vice president to James Monroe. Technically, Clinton was the only candidate, but almost 1,500 votes were cast for Peter Buell Porter, who was backed by New York political machine Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall hated Clinton and had printed and distributed ballots with Porter's name on them. Clinton was an enemy of Tammany because of his assertion that Aaron Burr, the first real leader of the organization, who took it from a speech-making society to an active political machine, had conspired to beat Thomas Jefferson in the presidential election of 1800. Ostensibly, the Democratic Republicans were running Jefferson for president and Burr for vice president, but the two men received the same number of votes in the Electoral College, which had to be revoted upwards of 30 times before Jefferson finally emerged as the winner, and Burr became vice president. This was the start of the nastiness that eventually led to Burr's illegal duel with Alexander Hamilton, in which Hamilton was shot and killed. In the wake of the 1800 election, Burr was basically shut out of the business of his party and lost the trust of Thomas Jefferson. Clinton's own history with Tammany was also influenced by his uncle George Clinton, who reviled Aaron Burr and sought to position his nephew to break up the Burr-loving faction of their party. So there's a lot of political nastiness at work here. Clinton was in office for a first 3-year term and then ran again and was reelected in 1820, serving until 1822. Clinton's political fortunes faltered during this time, as the New York State Constitutional Convention of 1821 shortened the gubernatorial term to only 2 years, and moved the term beginning to January 1st, cutting off the last 6 months of Clinton's second term. So he wasn't renominated for the 1822 election. During this time, Clinton served as president of the Erie Canal Commission, overseeing the ongoing canal project. Clinton's political enemies, the Bucktails, who were a faction of the Democratic Republicans that were influenced by Tammany Hall and therefore hated Clinton, agitated for and voted in the state legislature for his removal from the commission. This was a bad move on their part, as Clinton was nominated and reelected for governor in 1824 by the People's Party in opposition to the official Democratic-Republican candidate Samuel Young, who was also on the Canal Commission. He was reelected in 1826, serving as New York governor until his death in 1828. This perhaps illustrates better than anything else how Clinton's political fortunes were linked to his role as the spearhead of the Erie Canal. So now we have come at last to DeWitt Clinton's biggest claim to fame, the Erie Canal. And that's him at the base of the sculpture here, Erie Canal supporters. The idea of a canal to unite the East Coast with the interior of the country was not a new one. Before the Revolutionary War, George Washington expressed concerns about the loss of lands west of the Appalachian Mountains due to the French or Canadians, or both, due to a lack of connection. After the war, Washington organized the Potomac Company to turn the Potomac River into a canal running from the coast up to the mountains. This project was a financial disaster and still under construction by Washington's death in 1799. It was an achievement in engineering, however. So at around the same time, talk had begun about a canal project through New York State, where the geography was more favorable than that of Virginia. But it took a few decades to get the project together. There were questions about the engineering problems of such a project, not to mention the question of funding something that wasn't guaranteed to pay its own way. And there were questions about the route to be taken. While it would have been easier to make a shorter route to Lake Ontario, this plan wouldn't gain as much access to the Midwest, and as relations with the British declined leading up to the War of 1812, this idea was abandoned as they controlled Canada. In 1809, Thomas Jefferson called the prospect of building a canal through the state of New York little short of madness. He loved the idea, but he didn't think it was actually possible. This was the prevailing national opinion, and so the prospects for federal funding for the canal project were unlikely. So why did New York need a canal anyway? Overland travel across the state of New York to the interior of the country was extremely difficult and bordered on impossible during some times of the year. While the population of the young United States had rapidly increased, going from 3.9 million in 1790 to 6.3 million in 1805, the means of transportation were obsolete and a detriment to continued growth. Roads consisted of old Indian trails which had been widened and packed down with dirt. They could be extremely dusty in summer heat and terribly swampy in cold and wet weather, especially through spring thaw. Winters in New York were no less brutal at the start of our nation's history than they are now. In very marshy areas, the roads had logs set across them with dirt in between, which was an attempt to smooth the route. These were called corduroy roads. Waterways across the state often lacked bridges to connect the roads from one side to the other, making cargo passage difficult. In 1800, it took a few weeks to travel overland from New York City to Cleveland. New York's geography is favorable to a canal across the state. The Mohawk Valley forms a natural pathway through the Catskill and Adirondack Mountains, so it made sense that a canal should be constructed through the state this way. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was also having a canal mania, and successful canals were built in France, Germany, and Britain. The War of 1812 also showed the lack of decent transportation means to connect Lake Erie to the rest of the state, and the movement of equipment, men, and horses was dreadfully slow and expensive. And the war showed the importance of developing markets for American goods at home in America. So what concrete advantages would a canal give? Although canal technology seems very primitive to us in this age of self-driving cars and supersonic jet travel, in the 19th century, canals were an incredible technological innovation. Canals were flat and calm, unlike rivers, and it was easy for a boat to carry large amounts of cargo over water as opposed to over land, especially considering the conditions of roads at the time. Canal boats were not yet motorized, and there was control over speed and steering by way of the captain on board and the driver leading the animals, mules or horses, pulling the boat by way of the towpath. Cost of shipping cargo on a canal as opposed to overland was also vastly less, and it would become incredibly profitable to move more and more items to market, not to mention the advantage of moving people by way of the canal. I've talked to many visitors to the museum whose families ended up in the Midwest by way of the Erie Canal. This image is a postcard showing the calm, serene, enlarged Erie Canal near Schenectady. The prevailing attitude amongst Americans of the 19th century was that their creator had provided the tool setting and intelligence necessary to undertake such a project, so why not do it? An early proponent was one Jesse Hawley, a flour merchant tasked with moving flour from western New York, where Rochester would later become famous as the Flour City, to New York City. He discussed the idea of a canal to Lake Erie with later surveyor of the project, James Geddes. Hawley's own fortunes would have been vastly improved by the creation of such a canal. The summer high toll charges on his overland trips across the state cut into Hawley's profits and drove him into debt. He ended up fleeing New York for Pittsburgh to elude his creditors, but returned in 1807 and spent 20 months in Canandaigua in debtor's prison. He ended up writing 14 essays on the subject of the canal under the pen name Hercules. These were published in the Genesee Messenger, a Canandaigua newspaper. The essays are detailed and well thought out, with cost estimates and comparisons to European canals. Hawley put into words the concrete notion of a canal across New York State, and in turn inspired the canal fever that soon swept up a fervor among New York politicians, including DeWitt Clinton. At the time, New York was exploding in population even before the canal. By 1810, there were 959,000 people in New York State, a jump from 589,000 in 1800. And New York City had reached 125,000 and had become the largest city in the country. The canal project may not have been popular on a national scale, but it seemed possible that the state of New York could fund it. DeWitt Clinton came to be the political spearhead of the canal project, and it came to be known derisively as Clinton's Big Ditch because of his involvement. Clinton entered the canal story in 1810 when he was asked to join the commission to explore a route for a canal to Lake Erie and report, which eventually became the Erie Canal Commission. Clinton would serve on this commission until 1824. At the time, he was New York's most powerful politician. Commission members traveled a proposed canal route for the purposes of research and survey. Clinton kept a journal of the trip, which discussed all manner of subjects along with the business of the canal idea itself, history, geology, and even ornithology, as he cataloged birds seen along the Mohawk River. Trip across the state west and back took 53 days, and from this trip, the Canal Commission would put together a report to the state legislature. But before the canal could become reality, there were literal and figurative battles to be fought. The War of 1812 interrupted the progress of the plan for several years, and a few attempts to secure additional funding from the federal government would fall short. The Erie Canal was to be a New York project through and through. Clinton had the intellectual authority to turn the idea of a canal into reality, and he was capable of garnering such popular support for the project that his political enemies would be unable to oppose the project itself. Instead, they moved to attack the man, and somehow also made themselves out to look as if they were in favor of the project. In 1816, Clinton won preliminary legislative support for the canal, and the state legislature demanded complete plans for the project, including route, means of construction, and how it was to be financed. Clinton presided over the commission during this planning process. The work was to be divided into 3 sections: the Western Division, which was 165 miles from Lake Erie to the Seneca River, the Middle Division, covering 72 miles from the Seneca River to Rome, and the Eastern Division, covering 126 miles from Rome to Albany. Engineering the project was a concern. At the time, there were no professional engineers in this country, and the canal was created by talented amateurs such as James Geddes, Western Division, and Benjamin Wright, Middle Division. Charles Broadhead was assigned to the Eastern Division. Canvas White, another amateur engineer, joined them in this process and traveled to Great Britain to cover 2,000 miles of English canals on foot, learning and studying to bring knowledge back to New York. So how the heck were they going to pay for this? New York State issued bonds and taxed land, salt, and other items to repay the $7 million in debt that the canal would generate. Many small investors contributed money to the cause at the beginning, and as the work progressed, richer parties got involved. In early 1817, after several years of campaigning, planning, and strategizing by DeWitt Clinton and the Canal Commission, not to mention the large stumbling block of the War of 1812, the state legislature passed a Canal Act. Construction officially began July 4, 1817, just 3 days after Clinton took office as New York's governor on July 1st. So as you know, Clinton's political fortunes rose and fell during the canal construction period, but his triumphant return as New York's governor near the end of construction meant that he led the official opening ceremony, known as the Wedding of the Waters. This began October 26, 1825. It was the first complete voyage on the newly completed canal and took 9 days. Clinton was on the lead boat. On the morning of November 4th, the boats arrived in Albany. The boats then headed south on the Hudson River towards New York City. When they arrived, Clinton poured a keg of Lake Erie water into the Atlantic, thereby completing the Wedding of the Waters. I have for you a section of speech by Clinton on this hallowed occasion. This solemnity at this place, on the first arrival of vessels from Lake Erie, is intended to indicate and commemorate the navigable communication which has been accomplished between our Mediterranean seas and the Atlantic Ocean in about 8 years to the extent of more than 425 miles by the wisdom, public spirit, and energy of the state of New York, and may the God of heavens and earth smile most propitiously on the work and render it subservient to the best interests of the human race. Such an accomplishment. The Erie Canal has seen three major incarnations. The original canal, constructed from 1817 to 1825, which is now often affectionately called Clinton's Ditch. It was 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep and stretched over 363 miles with 83 locks. It cut travel time across the state down to just 6 to 11 days. The canal was later enlarged between 1836 and 1863, and it was then 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep. This took 15 miles out of the length by straightening sections of it. Improvements and additional enlargements were made before the original canal was replaced by the New York State Barge Canal in 1918. This is still the Erie Canal, but it is wider and it makes use of rivers and lakes along the way across the state. Some parts of the western division are still man-made, as there was a lack of suitable natural waterways. These man-made sections are wider and deeper than the original and enlarged canals. Many sections of the original canal, including the one through Syracuse, were closed and abandoned, sometimes paved over. That's what happened in Syracuse. The system of canals running across the state of New York were and are a huge part of the story of New York, and DeWitt Clinton's efforts and advocacy for this project should never be forgotten. DeWitt Clinton is also notable as a standard bearer of the fraternal order known as Freemasonry. In 1806, he was elected Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New York, a post he held until 1819. He helped to establish the Grand Encampment of the Knights Templar in the U.S., and was their first, second, and third Grand Master, spanning from 1818 to 1828. And DeWitt Clinton was the governor of New York during the notorious Morgan Affair in 1826. This interesting bit of cold case history began when a man by the name of William Morgan, who claimed to have been a Mason, stated that he intended to publish a book exposing their secrets, titled Illustrations of Freemasonry. Morgan was based in Batavia, New York at the time, and soon disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and no trace of him was ever found. It was surmised that the Masons had kidnapped and murdered him. This spurred a wave of anti-Masonic feelings, including a political movement against them called the Anti-Masonic Party. Clinton himself offered a reward of $1,000 for information on Morgan's whereabouts or demise. It was never claimed. Turning to Clinton's personal life now, a little bit. DeWitt Clinton was married twice. In 1796, he married Maria Franklin and ended up having 10 children with her. 4 sons and 3 daughters survived to at least the time of her death in 1818. One of his sons, George William Clinton, went on to become the mayor of Buffalo, the Queen City, which came to be as a result of the Erie Canal. In 1819, Clinton remarried to Catherine Jones, who survived him. DeWitt Clinton died suddenly on February 11, 1828, while in Albany. Unfortunately, in spite of his capable political leadership of the state, Clinton did not have the financial acumen to handle his own affairs, and as a result left his family in poor financial condition, with creditors beating down their door. Most of the family possessions were sold publicly to satisfy the claims of creditors, and there was no money left to help to bury Clinton. He was given a state funeral, but there was no gravesite purchase. Clinton's remains were kept in the family vault of friend and fellow Mason Dr. Samuel Stringer in Albany. After 16 years here, the Clinton family was financially able to correct this, and he was reinterred at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. He has a grand memorial there. So here are some images of DeWitt Clinton's grave. DeWitt Clinton left behind a major legacy. Beyond the unparalleled accomplishment of shepherding the Erie Canal project from start to finish, there are multiple towns and schools named for DeWitt Clinton, including 3 different iterations of Clinton, New York, including one in Clinton County. Columbia University, Clinton's alma mater, created a DeWitt Clinton Professorship of American History in 1926. I thought this was really neat. This is a glass flask that dates to about 1825 with his name and image on it. DeWitt Clinton appeared on a United States note issue of 1880 in the $1,000 denomination. And he also has a plant named for him, Clintonia borealis, which is also known as Clinton's lily. Although DeWitt Clinton's forays and attempted forays into national politics were brief, and his real political accomplishments were tied to the state of New York, I find it interesting that his most notable endeavor, the Erie Canal, was not just a win for the state, but a win for the fledgling nation as a whole. If not for DeWitt Clinton, we probably wouldn't be, speaking on behalf of the Erie Canal Museum. The museum is dedicated to his pet project. It's in the city of Syracuse, which became a city as a result of the Erie Canal. So thank you very much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this talk and you would like to support the museum financially and help to continue our work, I'll put some links in the comment section of this video. Thank you again.